Hey guys, welcome back. I hope you are having an amazing day. Let's get right into the stories. The first one is a pro-revenge story. I had this landlord, let's call him Mr. Thompson, who was pretty much a ghost. I lived in this high-rise building, about 30 stories tall, for over a decade. Despite living right next door to me, Thompson was cold and distant personally, but okay enough to deal with. The rent was decent, and our agreement was simple. Never bother him unless it's a life-or-death situation. Showerhead acting up, go buy a new one. Fridge on the fritz, get it fixed or just buy a new one. Take it out of the rent. Lost the receipt? Thompson would say, I don't care, I know roughly what a fridge costs. Just deduct it from the rent. Things were fine until 2021 when his wife, Mrs. Thompson, decided she wanted more cash. She got the bright idea to rent out our place as an office, totally illegal, and wanted us out ASAP. I agreed to move out a month early in exchange for a month's rent back plus my deposit, but then they did a complete 1-80. The place is trashed, they claimed. We can't give you anything until you fix all this stuff. They had two main gripes. My cats had scratched up the leather legs of the dining table, and my pull-up bar left 2 dents in the kitchen door frame, which was some pretty nice hardwood. They hit me with this massive list of tiny issues. Oh, you hung a photo here, and this tile has a tiny chip. I tried to be cooperative, even though it was the busiest time at work for me. I got the table legs re-leathered, spackled the photo frame wall holes, and patched the tile. But the door frame? I told them to take that out of the deposit. There were dozens of little wear and tear things. At one point I asked, you want me to change the window screens? These are all new and in better shape than when I moved in. But I did them all anyway. I trusted the guy and needed my money. When all was said and done, Thompson should have been giving me 35,000 yuan, about $4,000. He handed me 7. I still need to use the money to fix all that stuff, he said. If you can't accept the 7, I can't give you anything at all. I was fuming, but took the 7 grand. This is ridiculous, Thompson, I said. We had an agreement, he just shrugged. Take it or leave it. Now, people in the building love to gossip. I usually stayed out of it, but I did tell this older lady, Mrs. Chen, about my frustration. She told everyone. Mrs. Thompson went from being the queen bee of the building's mommy group to a social pariah overnight. People started giving Mr. Thompson the cold shoulder too. I originally told them I was moving to another city, but an opportunity came up and I ended up renting a similar unit in the same building. So they thought they could screw me over without consequences, but now they still had to see me. Often. A year later in 2022, the building office called me with a question about the floor heating. I went to check it out and noticed the door frame still had those dents. I called Thompson right away. What the hell, man? I said. You never fixed the door frame? Mind your own business, he snapped and hung up. Fast forward to 2023. I noticed the light in my old place was still on at 3 a.m. Weird. I went to check and the door was wide open. The place was absolutely trashed. Cabinets broken, stuff scrawled on the walls saying, lazy landlord. And those dents on the kitchen door frame? Still there. Thompson had never fixed a thing, just pocketed my money. By this time, smartphones were everywhere, and we had a chat group for the whole building. About 500 people. I took pictures of everything and posted them to the group. Turns out Thompson had also kept these new tenants' deposit, and there was a huge scene when they trashed the place. Cops were called and everything. People in the chat started chiming in with their own complaints and pictures. Videos of people smoking in the hallways, leaving leaky garbage outside their front door, using foul language in front of kids, dirty footprints everywhere. In the end, Thompson got hit with some hefty fines. 1, creating a public disturbance. 2, degrading the quality of the living space, and 3, illegally renting a residence as an office. To top it off, the building management wouldn't let him bring in workers to fix the place, so it sat empty for like 6 months. The fines were massive. So Thompson took about 1.5 months rent from me, but ended up losing a year's worth of rent plus all those fines. As I watched him sulk around the building, I couldn't help but think, suck it, bro. The next one is an entitled people's story. I never thought I'd be at war with my neighbors over a pond. But here we are. Let me tell you how this mess started. I inherited my grandpa's house a few years back. It's a nice place on the outskirts of town with a decent-sized property. The best part? A beautiful pond right in the backyard. Grandpa used to love fishing there, and I've got fond memories of joining him as a kid. When I moved in, I was excited to have my own private fishing spot. I stocked it with some bass and bluegill, built a little dock, and even set up a few chairs. It was my own slice of paradise. Everything was great until the new homeowner association board got elected. They decided our quiet neighborhood needed more community engagement or whatever. That's when they set their sights on my pond. It started with a knock on my door one Saturday morning. I opened it to find Karen, the homeowner association president, with that fake smile plastered on her face. "Good morning," she chirped. "We're here to discuss the community pond project." I blinked, confused. "Community pond? What are you talking about?" Karen's smile widened. "Your pond, of course. We've decided it would be a wonderful asset for the entire neighborhood. We're planning a big fishing event next weekend." I couldn't believe what I was hearing. "Excuse me? That's my private property. You can't just decide to use it without my permission." Karen's smile faltered for a second before she recovered. "Oh, but it's for the good of the community. Everyone's so excited. We've already sent out invitations." "I don't care if you've invited the president," I said, my anger rising. "It's not happening. The pond is private property, end of story." Karen's fake friendliness disappeared. "We'll see about that," she snapped before storming off. I thought that was the end of it. Boy, was I wrong. The next day I came home from work to find a crew setting up picnic tables and a sign that read "Neighborhood Fishing Spot" near my pond. I was livid. I marched over to the workers. "What the hell do you think you're doing? This is private property." The foreman looked confused. "We got permission from the homeowner association. They said this was community property now." I pulled out my phone and called the police. While waiting for them to arrive, I told the workers to pack up and leave. They seemed unsure but started dismantling the tables. When the cops showed up, Karen and a few other homeowner association board members appeared out of nowhere. Karen started spinning some tale about how the pond was always meant to be a community area and I was selfishly keeping it to myself. I pulled out the deed to my property, which clearly showed the pond was included. The police officer looked it over and told Karen and her crew they needed to leave. Karen was fuming. "This isn't over," she hissed as she left. And it wasn't. Over the next few weeks, I dealt with a barrage of harassment. Nasty notes in my mailbox, people accidentally wandering onto my property to fish, and constant complaints filed against me for every little thing. The final straw came when I caught Karen and a group of kids trespassing, fishing poles in hand. I'd had enough. I called my lawyer and explained the situation. He was outraged on my behalf and suggested we sue the homeowner association for harassment and attempted theft of property. We filed the lawsuit, and let me tell you, it was satisfying to see Karen's face when she got served with the papers. The case went to court, and it was a doozy. Karen tried to argue that the pond was a natural resource that should belong to everyone. My lawyer shut that down quick, pointing out that it was a man-made pond on private property. The judge was not impressed with the homeowner association's actions. He ruled in my favor, ordering the homeowner association to pay damages for the harassment and attempted theft. He also issued a restraining order preventing any homeowner association member from entering my property without explicit permission. But I wasn't done. My lawyer suggested we could push for the dissolution of the homeowner association board, given their clear abuse of power. We filed another motion, and after reviewing the evidence of their actions, the judge agreed. The entire homeowner association board was forced to step down, and a special election was held to appoint new members. Karen and her cronies were banned from running or holding any homeowner association position in the future. The cherry on top? The judge ordered Karen to personally pay for a new, taller fence around my property, including the pond area. As I watched the fence go up, I couldn't help but feel a sense of victory. My private fishing spot was secure, and I'd taught a valuable lesson about respecting private property. These days, the neighborhood is much quieter. The new homeowner association board keeps to themselves, and I can enjoy my pond in peace. Sometimes I invite the neighbors over for a barbecue and fishing, on my terms. I learned a lot from this experience, mainly that you should never let anyone push you around, even if they claim it's for the greater good. Stand your ground, know your rights, and don't be afraid to fight back when necessary. Now, if you'll excuse me, I've got some fish waiting for me. And the best part, I don't have to share them with anyone. The next one is a petty revenge story. This goes back decades to when I was 7 or 8 at school. In those days, you could buy sherbet that with fruit flavors in fruit-shaped plastic. So an orange-shaped and colored one for orange flavor, etc. I used to get one of these quite often and eat at break. One kid, I'll call him Jeff Smith, always bothered me to share it with him. I usually ended up having to run away or hide or other things. He never took no for an answer and would threaten me. One Xmas we, brothers and I, all got a Snoopy soap shaped like Snoopy OFC, and it seemed too cool to use as soap. But one day the connection between shapes gave me an idea. I grated Snoopy a bit and put Snoopy flakes into one of the plastic containers and took it to school. Next day I got pestered by Jeff again and threatened, so I gave in. I handed him orange Snoopy and said, "Just have a little bit." He tipped out almost all the contents into his hand and threw it in his mouth. Looked very smug for about 1 second, then ran off. I was pleased with this, but then by lunchtime was being asked, "Did you poison Jeff Smith?" So had to keep explaining to classmates. End of lunchtime, I was called into the headmaster's office. This was serious. He was a scary and serious man. "What happened with you and Smith?" This is UK in the 70s. We were all surnames to him. "He claims you poisoned him," he asked. I just explained he kept badgering me, so I ground up soap and told him to only have a little bit, and while I spoke, the strangest thing happened. His mouth kept twitching slightly at the edges. This was a scary authoritarian figure to me, but I just carried on explaining, resigned to whatever my fate would be. At the end he said in a strange voice, "I see, don't do it again," and ushered me out of the room very quickly. I was surprised not to be disciplined, but hey, I'm not stupid. I left. He was working so bloody hard not to just burst out laughing. I like to think that story got told to other teachers. Jeff never bothered me again, after literally washing his mouth out with soap. The next one is a malicious compliance story. I've worked my way up the ladder at the company where I work, but when I started, I was a support agent. By the time this story happened, I was a team lead of some kind, I don't remember which. What matters is that I still worked directly supporting customers, but I also had a fair amount of agency. I didn't have to ask for permission or assistance to do anything related to my job. We're a software company, but we used to sell a specific small Bluetooth accessory that worked with one of our apps. It came in several bright colors and we sold multi-packs. It was the kind of device you might need more than one of, and it was a popular gift. One year during the Christmas season, our manufacturer ducked up gloriously. They didn't deliver all of the inventory we were supposed to get, and worse, much of what we did get was messed up and had serious defects. It was a horrible mess and a serious detriment to our small company. I was on the front lines of cleaning it up. We wound up severely back-ordered at the busiest time of year, having sold units that should have been delivered, but that we either never received or found to be defective upon arrival. We had to contact people and let them know their orders would be delayed until after the holidays. Some people wanted refunds, some people wanted their items late. We tried to be helpful and bent over backwards to be apologetic while trying to keep this debacle from becoming a catastrophe and incentivize people not to cancel. There was one man who wanted us to perform magic, however. He wanted his order, our largest multi-pack, and he wanted it now. I don't know how many times he contacted us, but I wound up being the only one to deal with him because he'd always be escalated to me. I told him over and over again that we couldn't send his order even though we very much wanted to, so we'd be happy to refund him. If he wanted to wait, there were many others ahead of him to get their orders. He demanded that he get his order first. He didn't care who else had to wait. He would berate me and try to literally command me to do as he said almost daily for a while, no matter how many times I explained why I literally couldn't. Eventually, I opened the spreadsheet where we were keeping our back orders and moved him to the very bottom. Yeah, I was prolonging my own suffering, but he had me feeling petty. After the holidays ended and upper management waged a nuclear war with our manufacturer, usable stock started rolling in. I bumped a few deserving or eager customers to the top of the list, but mostly sent them out in order. He's the only one I bumped down, but I had something ready for the next time he decided to scream at me. When he inevitably did, I told him we had stock, but others were receiving theirs first, and we hadn't yet gotten in the colors he ordered in his multi-pack. I was sort of planning to do what I did anyway, but he was kind enough to give me explicit permission. "I don't care what colors you send, you're to send them to me immediately." Our colors included Susan G. Komen pink. The customer was gloriously smug and condescending when I told him we'd go ahead and fulfill his order right away. He definitely thought he had won some kind of victory. But sure enough, the day his package arrived, he sent an email complaining. "I know I said I'd accept any color, but really? You sent me, a man, an order of nothing but pink? I want these replaced. Send me something else." I told him that's all we had available for him and that the conversation was over. And so it was. I never heard from him again. It took a few years before I brought it up, but I've told that anecdote at workplace meetings a few times, including to my boss, the CEO. I wouldn't take another support job to save every orphaned puppy on Earth, but that story was worth the misery. Always be nice to support agents, for your own sake. The next one is an entitled people's story. Back in the early 2000s, our town was getting a makeover. As part of this makeover, a new building was built in a car park, utterly replacing it. This new building contained the registrar office, library run by Nottinghamshire Council, and a few other things. The library used to be located in the neighboring listed building. Not long after the library relocation, I decided to pay them a visit and was amazed at how amazing it was. With this relocation came a new system for rental. Next to the entrance was a self-service system. Instead of going to the main counter where the staff scan your membership card, scan the book's barcode, and then stamp the return date in the book, the new system uses RFID. You scan your membership card on the machine and then place as many books into the machine as will fit. Not one book at a time, but you could scan 10 books in one go if you could to save time. In the end, it gives you a receipt listing the books and the return date, etc., then you just leave. There was even a machine for returns. You scan your card, then the books, and then put the books into the return bin. We'll come back to this machine in a moment. I glanced around the aisles and found myself in the comic aisle. I thought, sure, why not something for a quick read? Only for my utter surprise, they had a few manga on the shelves. I say a few because there were only 4 books of the same series. I even remember the name of the series as it was the series that got me into reading manga in general. Chibi Vampire. I grabbed them and laid them on the floor while I grabbed a few other comics, a Sonic the Hedgehog and another that I don't remember. Just then someone says as I was standing up, "Hey, give me those manga, I want them." I looked to see who it was, and it was this lad, still in his school years, somewhat rotund, heavy on the acne and thick-framed glasses. He was holding a pile of manga himself. I said sorry, but that I'm getting them. I walked away and headed for the science fiction section to see if there was something of interest that I can take my time reading. Along the way, he was following me and demanding that I hand over the manga. I ignored him as I browsed the science fiction section. I eventually just grabbed a random book as he kept demanding the manga, even switching to saying that I stole them from his pile. I then went to scanner machine and scanned the books, but one of the manga didn't scan when I checked the receipt. Even after scanning the books, he was still following me, demanding the books. I went to the main counter and spoke to the lady there. I showed her my receipt and the books. "Ah yes, sorry about that," she said. "Some books slip through and haven't been updated with new system yet. Give me a moment, please." As she reached into a desk drawer, the lad started demanding she returns the books that I stole to him. As she pulled out an RFID sticker and slapped it into the manga, she asked him what he's talking about. He said that I stole the manga from him and refused to give them back, etc. After she registered the newly upgraded manga into the system, she looked at him. "If that's true, then it can be sorted out." She looked at me. "Did you steal the books from him?" I didn't, and I explained what happened. "I understand." She looked at him. "We can check the cameras. If he did steal them from you, I can return them to you. However, if you've been harassing him, then I'll ask you to leave without any books." He stuttered and said that it wasn't necessary and walked away. The lady asked me for my card so that she can scan the book out for me while they're at it, so I left with my books. Here's something interesting. I enjoyed the manga and wanted to read more, so when I returned them to the library, I asked if there were any more of the series, but when the lady checked the system, those 4 were the only ones in the entirety of Nottinghamshire. So I decided to just buy them off Amazon. Usually the books were imported from the United States to here in the United Kingdom. However, one book was over in France. When it arrived, I noticed that it had many customs stamps on them. The book had started its journey in France. Instead, coming straight over to the UK, it went up to Germany, through Poland, Ukraine, into Russia, all the way across Russia and down into China, then Australia, then Western US, across to Eastern US, then finally into the UK. The next one is an entitled people's story. It was a sunny day as I pulled up to my house in the picturesque neighborhood of Belgrade, Serbia. I had recently moved to this charming area, excited to start a new chapter in my life. Little did I know that my peaceful existence would soon be disrupted by a relentless force known as Karen. As I parked my car, I noticed a vehicle obstructing the street, preventing me from driving any further. Confusion clouded my mind as I rolled down my window and approached the woman standing outside the car. She introduced herself as Karen and inquired about my destination. Perplexed by her audacity, I replied, "I live on this street. This is where I'm going." Karen's response sent shockwaves through me. She claimed to own the public road, an outrageous assertion that defied logic and common sense. Despite my protests, she remained adamant, her cigarette smoke swirling arrogantly around her. Unable to reason with her, I retreated to my driveway, hoping the encounter was a mere anomaly. Seeking solace, I confided in my neighbor, who happened to live opposite the rundown house where Karen resided. To my relief, my neighbor reassured me that Karen was notorious in the neighborhood for her unreasonable behavior. According to my neighbor, Karen had moved away from the area due to her home becoming a hoarder's haven. Although no one could substantiate the claim without trespassing, the deteriorating condition of the house lent credibility to the story. It seemed that Karen's troubled mind was the root of her hostility towards others, an unfortunate reality I was about to experience firsthand. A few days later, I awoke to a distressing sight. My car was being towed, and there stood Karen, reveling in her malicious triumph. She had called the towing company, falsely accusing me of parking on private property. My frustration grew as I confronted the tow truck driver, who reluctantly admitted his affiliation with Karen and the dubious nature of the tow. Determined not to let Karen's actions go unpunished, I decided to fight fire with fire. Retrieving my car proved to be a minor inconvenience as I had the financial means to cover the expenses. However, I was prepared to dedicate my time and energy to expose Karen's true nature. I reported Karen's abandoned house as a safety hazard to the city authorities. Expressing my concerns about the condition of the property and its potential occupancy, I urged them to investigate. To my delight, my neighbor joined forces, reporting a putrid smell emanating from Karen's abode. The city promptly responded to our complaints, sending inspectors to evaluate the house's safety. To our horror, they discovered not only the reality of a hoarder's nightmare, but also numerous perilous conditions within the premises. The neglected state of Karen's house rendered it uninhabitable. Justice prevailed, as the city ordered the demolition of the hazardous structure, eliminating the blight that had plagued the neighborhood. The property where the dilapidated house once stood was eventually purchased by my neighbor, expanding her domain and improving the community's aesthetic. The tale serves as a reminder that antagonizing others can have severe consequences. Karen, once an oppressive force, had inadvertently orchestrated her own downfall. The triumph of justice and the restoration of peace in our neighborhood stood as a testament to the power of perseverance and solidarity. The next one is a pro-revenge story. I grew up on a horse ranch in Colorado. We had a long piece of property, about 80 acres, and we raised Missouri foxtrotters. We had lived there for almost 20 years when some folks bought a strip of property way at the back of our land. It was a strange plot of land as it was very narrow and was sandwiched between our back fence and a busy county road. We were surprised anyone would buy it, actually, as it forced the house to be pretty close to the said road. Well, we never met these new neighbors until one day my dad gets a notice from a lawyer telling us that, after having surveyed the property lines, our back fence encroaches on their property between 3 and 6 inches, depending on the spot along the fence line. These folks had never met us, never introduced themselves. Our first introduction was this legal demand. My father was a salt-of-the-earth kind of man, very kind but also very strong-willed. He called these folks, arranged a meet-up, and tried to talk some sense into them. First, did 3 to 6 inches really matter that much, and why had they not come to us to talk it through? He even offered a number of different compromises. These folks were hostile from the get-go. They demanded he move the fence immediately or they would sue. Apparently, the law stated they had to put their house so far away from our fence line, and they wanted to push it as far back from the road as they could when they built it, so they wanted that 6 inches very badly. I still remember when my dad got home from the meeting. He hung his hat up and shook his head when he told my mom in his slow way, "Well, looks like we got the kind of folks for neighbors you don't ever want to have for neighbors." They sued and won, and we were forced to move the fence in 2 weeks. I say we because I was the free slave labor, as all farm kids are in this kind of thing. All that fencing material and the time were a big cost for my family, but we got the work done in early spring. Here is where the fun comes in. So the new neighbors broke ground and built all through the end of winter and into spring. The very next weekend after they had moved into their house, Dad rousted me out of bed, and we took the big truck into town to the lumberyard. I was extremely puzzled as we loaded up a bunch of fencing material and building supplies. We didn't have any big projects going that I knew about, and I kept asking him what it was for, but he just told me to wait and see with a devilish smile on his face. We built a pen and a small enclosure very near our back property line, directly behind the neighbor's new shiny house. The next day, one of our farm friends delivered a half-dozen pigs to their new home. Dan insisted on feeding those hogs table scraps and all the things that would go in the composter, as well as some good balanced hog feed to keep them healthy. Now you may not know this, but the smell of pig excrement is directly related to what they eat and their pen. Table scraps make them smell bad. I mean bad. I had to drive the four-wheeler back there every day to take care of them, and within a month, halfway there, and my eyes would start watering. It smelled so bad. When we mucked out the pen with the bobcat, we also made the pile right next to the pen. I can't even imagine how bad the smell was living in that house. The neighbors, of course, freaked out, and again, without ever even trying to talk to us, went the legal route. They lost. The area was zoned agricultural, and my dad had done his homework to make sure he was breaking no laws or regulations. The pigs were far enough from us and our other neighbors that it didn't bother anyone but the people he wanted it to bother. Come fall, when winter moved in, we sold the pigs for slaughter, and Dad stacked up a bunch of building supplies next to the pen and let the neighbors know we would be expanding the profitable operation in the spring when they came out to scream at him. He smiled the whole time, speaking in his slow, steady way. The new neighbors sold their new house in January when the ground was frozen and the new owners would not smell the pen. As soon as the old neighbors were gone, we tore down the enclosure, spread the nasty stuff on the hayfield, and the new neighbors never had any bad smell come spring. They also turned out to be great neighbors and are still lifelong friends. Never mess with a rancher. The next one is a petty revenge story. So I've had my number for 5 years, maybe 6. I don't remember exactly. When I got this number, the previous owner still received regular messages and phone calls. It's completely understandable that she didn't have everyone updated on her newest number or lack of number. The first 3 months, it meant nothing to me. I'd answer the calls and send them on their way. Well, that was until I got a phone call from an elementary school looking for someone. Let's call her Sarah. Sarah's daughter was throwing up and running a high fever and needed to go home. I told the school that this was a new number for me, and there was no Sarah around. I thought that certainly this issue would make her come to the realization that she needed to update her number. But no. I had to block the school's number because I continued to get calls and texts that had way too much information about Sarah's daughter, including her name, age, and school events with times and changes in school schedules. I wasn't comfortable receiving that info, so I blocked it. Maybe 2 or 3 weeks after I blocked the school, Sarah's grandmother called me because I assumed the school couldn't get a hold of Sarah. But I had to tell Grandma that I'm not Sarah, and to please ask her granddaughter to update her information. Sarah still did not. With all the information that I unwillingly had on Sarah, full name, age, where she attends college, her home address, and where she works, I found her on Facebook, and kindly asked her to not use her old number anymore. I'm not sure if she saw the message or not, but it didn't help my problem. This has been ongoing for years, and it's not just spam. It's people she knows, co-workers, family, doctors, even her real estate agent. So, before if she had appointments that were asking to be verified via text to my phone, I would just ignore them. But she had an appointment this time, and I am just so fed up with Sarah still giving out this number after 5 years of this nonsense that I canceled her appointment for her. A few days later, a new appointment to the same place needed verification, and I canceled it again, and the next one I get will be canceled also. Get your act together, Sarah. The next one is an entitled people story. So this has been developing over the last 6 weeks or so, when an elderly woman, her friend, and her handicapped niece moved into the house beside us. Things started off interesting, but the women all seemed nice enough. My wife and I were finishing up a movie at around 11 p.m. when we heard something at the side of our house. It sounded like someone was trying to get through our side gate into the backyard. Upon investigating, I saw that someone was trying to get in. Our new neighbors had just driven into town and were confused about which side gate was theirs, and were attempting to open our locked gate. I helped them to get into their own yard. Their real estate agent had left their key in the backyard, and helped them move their bags into their house. I got to meet the 3 women who were moving in and realized that they were in no shape to be moving heavy things around the house. The new owner, Candy, not her real name, but her real name is still a stripper's name, so I think it works, is in her 70s and gets around with a cane. Her friend, I believe that they are romantically involved, but we live in the South, so I think she is accustomed to not saying so explicitly, gets around with a walker, and the niece is in her 50s, and is quite severely mentally handicapped. Seeing this, I offered to help them move anything that the movers had misplaced. Candy mentioned that some items were in the wrong rooms, but I had to be getting home soon, and would be back tomorrow to help. I arrived at their place around 8 the next night after getting our kids to bed and just moved all their boxes from the garage into the correct rooms. Not a big deal. The real issue was that they had some large pieces of furniture that were misplaced, and I did not have a dolly to move them around on my own. At this point, Candy and her friend were being extremely thankful and polite, so I told the women that I would be more than happy to snag one from a friend on the way home from work tomorrow and could help to move the rest of the stuff, and that I would be over at about the same time. Well, work the next day turned into a complete dumpster fire. I ended up having to stay at work until a bit after midnight to get everything done that needed to be done. When I got home, I wrote a note explaining what had happened, and that I would still be willing to help move things when I got off work tomorrow. After this, I never had another good experience with them. I went over the next day and asked if they had seen my note, and Candy said, "Because you flaked, I had to hire someone to do this for me." I was completely taken aback, as this was a complete reversal from her original demeanor. 2 days later, Candy had someone setting up internet, and as these are all new constructions, a new line had to be buried. The box which the line connected into for Candy's house, and our own was a couple of feet on our side of the property line. As this was done on a Saturday, I was home while the line was being buried and asked the installer to run the line on the neighbor's side of the property line until he could turn into the box. Neighbors had told him to run it along our pavers leading to the backyard, about 2 feet over our property line. I am sure he did not realize that he was on our property, but Candy did. The next week we got hit with a fine from our homeowner association for leaving dirt from work on our property and our neighbor's lawn. Going outside, I saw that there was a small amount of sand right around where the buried line came into the box on our property, and when I explained to the homeowner association that this was caused by the installation of the neighbor's cable, the fine was dropped. Clearly, Candy had called this in, which really pissed me off, but she would not come to the door when I was knocking to talk to her about it. Small things like this kept happening. I would go out and our recycling was full, as it takes a few weeks to get your bin delivered, so Candy just threw her stuff in ours. We had an homeowner association inspector come over to assess unauthorized permanent structures on our property. These structures were a trampoline, which is not considered permanent by the homeowner association, and a small play structure, which is, however, we applied with the homeowner association to install that one. Well, she has escalated things over the last couple of weeks. The Monday before last, we had a crew coming in to install solar panels on our home. While this was being done, the cops showed up as someone had called in that people were breaking onto our property and trying to get through our back door. The cops were cool and said that someone must have just been confused about what was going on, and I informed them of the issues that we were having with our neighbor, but they didn't say much about it and didn't do anything. I was out with the installers working in the yard. There was no way that anyone could reasonably believe that people were breaking into our home. Once again, we had an inspector called on us to check out an unapproved modification to our roof, the solar panels that we paid $400 to the homeowner association to install. On Sunday, the cops showed up again, and this time it was much more serious. The call that they had gotten this time was that our children were locked in our backyard in the heat, that my 2-year-old was out there naked, and that they were screaming to be let back in. Basically, we were being accused of abusing our children. Thankfully, the screaming was still going on when the cops arrived, as my 2-year-old was squealing and laughing, running through the sprinklers. It took a little longer to assuage the cops this time, and they told me that I probably should have my daughter in a swimsuit next time. Due to the nature of this call, they did speak with the neighbor afterward. Candy feigned ignorance and said that her handicapped niece must have placed the call. The niece is almost completely nonverbal, so this was clearly BS. But I do not think that the cops wanted to deal with this, and talked with us one more time, explaining their conversation with Candy before heading out. Not really sure what we can do at this point. I submitted a complaint to the homeowner association, but I do not think that is going to do anything, and I am not sure if this has progressed to criminal harassment yet, but I am sure this is far from over. Update 1. The neighbor on the opposite side of Candy, let's call her Katie, has been getting some work done on her home, including the installation of a sunroom. At 6 a.m. on Sunday, Candy made her way into Katie's backyard through the normally locked side gate and went into the sunroom to look around. Katie was notified by her security system that someone was on her property, so she called the cops. Candy was gone by the time the cops arrived, and Katie did not recognize her. But Candy's return to her property was caught on our Ring camera. The commotion next door got us up, and my wife checked our notifications. Katie had the cops issue a trespass to Candy, and we requested that they also inform Candy that she was not welcome on our property either. Cops told us it would be criminal trespass if she does so after being warned. We reached out to a local security company regarding getting cameras on the sides and back of our home. The quote is a bit out of our budget, so we will be looking around for more options, but we will definitely be installing them. I know we can save a ton by setting up our system, but the wife hates exposed wires, and it is definitely out of my capacity to do something she would find acceptable. The next one is an entitled parent story, so the only reason why the entitled parent in this story didn't go to prison was because I was 18 at the time, but the fact that this happened the way it did still pisses me off. So when I turned 18, I started working at a call center and often walked around the city a lot in order to avoid my toxic mother. Yes, I know what you're thinking, but I was safe and always had a form of self-defense. I was young, but not stupid. Anyways, that year, I experienced another growth spurt and went from a C cup to a DD cup. And I was getting a lot of weird looks when in public. As much as I hate to say it, I was pretty young and naive, so I never thought it was because of the way my body changed, but I preferred to keep my distance from people. One day, I decided that I was going to go to Walmart so that I could pick out some yarn for a crochet project I wanted to work on while at work. We were allowed to crochet as long as we didn't avoid the calls that were automatically answered on our systems. While I was checking out the yarn, I noticed a kid who looked like he was 13-14 standing at the end of the aisle watching me. Thanks to my history of getting bullied and beaten up, I immediately grew cautious and started debating if I wanted to get my yarn here or go to the Hobby Lobby across the parking lot. Before I could make a decision, an adult man came up and started leading the son off, so I started to relax and think that I was overreacting. That is, until the ED came back. ED, excuse me, but where did you get your implants? They look so real. Excuse me? I was really embarrassed and shocked, and I was already getting creeper vibes from this guy. Your implants... He waves his hands in front of my breasts and gets uncomfortably close to me. Where did you get them? Me. I was at a loss for words and didn't know if he was serious or just being a creep overall. At this moment, the kid came up and poked at my right breast, and I instinctively smacked his hand away, not caring that he was a kid. Excuse me, but you really shouldn't do that, especially to a woman. It's not polite, and it's considered SA and SH. Edie immediately got mad at me and started screaming at me to not touch his son. He said that it was my fault and that if I didn't want attention like this, then I should keep my fun bags put away. I was in tears and looking around for an escape, especially since, the more the ED yelled at me, the closer he got to me. He started telling me that there was no way my breasts were real, and that he needed to feel them to know for sure. He even told me that I needed to let the ES touch them, so he could learn the difference between implants and real breasts. Remembering the fact that I had my pepper spray in my bag for any occasion where I needed to defend myself, I usually had a knife too, but that seemed a bit extreme in the heat of the moment. I pulled the can of pepper spray and told them both to step back and get away from me. At this point, an employee turned the corner, having heard us yelling, and saw me holding the pepper spray. He freaked out and called for a manager before coming up and yelling at me, demanding to know what I was doing. Thanks to me being in tears, the ED was able to butt in and started lying to the employee that I was seducing his son and pulled my pepper spray out when the ED had tried to come to his son's rescue. The ES immediately started agreeing with the ED, and the employee was already saying that he was going to call the police while the ED demanded that me and my big breasts get kicked out of the store. Thankfully, at that second, one of my co-workers, a big burly guy who often gave me a ride at night after hearing that I took the taxi home at night, because my mother refused to teach me to drive, rounded the corner, leading a manager right to the mess. The manager demanded that everyone shut up and calm down, and when we had, he turned to me and asked my side of the story. I told him how the ED insisted that I needed to let them feel my breasts to see if they were real, and how I had already explained I wasn't comfortable and didn't want their attention. The ED backtracked on his story and tried to defend himself and EK, saying it was all for educational purposes, and lied that I had agreed beforehand. This is when my coworker got mad and pointed at the camera at the end of the aisle, reminding them that it would have caught everything. The ED and EK both went silent for a moment before making a break for the exit. The manager took off after them, yelling at them to stop, and my coworker berated the employee for threatening me the way he did. Of course, the ED and EK got away, but the employee was fired, and I never went back to that store by myself per my friend's request. Please teach your sons to respect women and don't harass women. Plenty of us are insecure of our bodies and don't want the attention our bodies attract, and we appreciate it if you don't make things worse for us. Also, never assume that a woman's body is fake or that you are entitled to touch it. The next one is an entitled people's story. I want to share a story about the ongoing battle I had with my inconsiderate neighbor. You see, I live on a sprawling piece of land that serves as my small farm, surrounded by ordinary homes of non-farming neighbors. Most of the time, we coexist peacefully, but one neighbor in particular seemed to thrive on being an absolute jerk. He disregarded everyone around him, thinking only of himself. His frequent wild parties were a testament to his complete lack of respect. Every week his raucous gatherings would shake the foundations of the neighborhood. The loud music would blare into the night while he and his friends drowned themselves in alcohol. Their rowdy behavior spilled onto the streets, shattering the tranquility of our once peaceful enclave. As a farmer, I knew the importance of rising early to begin my day's work, and this incessant noise disrupted not only my routine, but also the lives of those who had regular jobs. But let me clarify that this story isn't primarily about the parties. Sadly, no one had taken action against them, as previous attempts to address the issue had failed. Instead, I want to focus on a different problem that arose from these gatherings, where the attendees chose to park their cars. Yes, they thought it was perfectly acceptable to invade my property and leave their vehicles there. I tried various approaches to address the issue. I confronted them, put up signs declaring it private property, but all my efforts fell on deaf ears. Eventually, I mustered the courage to approach my neighbor directly to discuss the parking situation. I chose not to mention the noise issue, as others had already tried to no avail. Instead, I wanted to concentrate on the parking problem. Me. Some of your guests parked on my property again last night. Neighbor. So? Me. Are you seriously suggesting that it's okay for them to do that? It's my property, and I'm kindly asking you to tell them not to park there. It's damaging my grass, and I simply don't want them there. Neighbor. I told them to park there. You have all that space, and they'll be gone before you even wake up. What's the big deal? Me. The big deal is that it's my property, and I'm telling you that they're not allowed to park there. Now, a couple of important points need clarification. Firstly, the cars would usually be gone or mostly gone by the time I began my day, meaning they were likely driving off my property while still intoxicated. It was nothing short of a miracle that no fences had been damaged at this point. Secondly, you might wonder why I hadn't called the police or had the cars towed, as is commonly suggested in such situations. Well, let me explain. I live in a small country area where the local police are utterly useless. I don't mean they lack the will to help, rather, they simply wouldn't come at all. And if they did, they could easily be bribed by anyone with enough money. As for towing the cars, we didn't have any tow trucks in our vicinity. There were a couple of tow yards where cars could be dropped off, but they lacked the necessary trucks and drivers. However, I had a stroke of luck. The manager of the local tow yard happened to be my cousin. I paid him a visit, and he shared a little-known secret. Some farmers, with their own equipment, could bring the cars to the tow yard themselves, and the owners would have to pay a hefty fine to reclaim them. Inspired by this information, I decided to give the guests one last chance. Call it a soft spot or a penchant for second chances, but I wanted to give people the benefit of the doubt until the very end. To make my intentions crystal clear, I erected a large sign on my property, boldly declaring that parking was prohibited and violators would face towing. I placed it precisely where the guests tended to park and awaited my neighbor's next party. It didn't take long for the party to commence, signaled by the booming music that echoed through the night. I didn't even need to keep a watchful eye. The noise alone told me they had arrived. After a few hours, I stepped outside and discovered 3 cars parked not only on my property, but directly in front of the sign. I fetched some chains, skillfully linking the cars together, and maneuvered my trusty farming truck. Apologies for not knowing the exact English term. Ready to tow all 3 vehicles. I carefully dragged them down the block to my cousin's tow yard, where he awaited their arrival. With a sense of satisfaction, I watched the cars being securely impounded. The final touch of revenge, however, came when the irate guests, fueled by alcohol and anger, stormed my front door alongside my obnoxious neighbor. They screamed about their missing cars, while I calmly pointed out the sign's warning and revealed the location of their impounded vehicles. Then, with a triumphant slam, I shut the door in their faces. It was a rare kind of satisfaction indeed. Now here's where the story takes an unexpected twist. A few days later, my cousin informed me that the car owners had come to retrieve their vehicles, grumbling and cursing him out, a typical occurrence in his line of work. They threatened to involve the police, but to their dismay, everything I had done was entirely legal. Both my cousin and I were safe from any repercussions. Word seemed to have spread about the consequences of parking on my property as the issue gradually diminished. In the few months that followed, I only encountered 1 or 2 stray cars trespassing on my land. In those instances, I promptly pointed out the sign's warning, and the drivers swiftly moved their vehicles. I understand that it's not a perfect ending, for my neighbor remains an insufferable jerk who continues to host late-night parties. Nevertheless, having reclaimed my property, I find solace in knowing that it's a significant victory until a solution is found for the rest of his disruptive behavior. The next one is a pro-revenge story. My now ex-wife Kate and I moved to an apartment in 2010. The house, a renovated townhouse, was split between 2 sides with 2 apartments on the bottom and 2 apartments upstairs, addresses ending in 126, 128 accordingly. I wasn't the biggest fan of the apartment, as it was a much older building than I had ever lived in, but I quickly adjusted to the wood creaking throughout the night. During the initial walkthrough, we noticed the only problem was a dip in the bathroom ceiling. The landlord, Jay, promised us he would get it fixed ASAP. Exactly 1 year after we moved in, there was a loud crash at 4 a.m. The bathroom ceiling had collapsed, with tiles and wood scattered all over the floor and in the bathtub. Kate, who was typically more aggressive, kept calling Jay throughout the day. When she finally got in touch with him around 9 p.m., she explained what happened and insisted it be fixed immediately. Jay rebuffed, yelling that his girlfriend was a lawyer and he didn't need to do anything. That's when I got mad. I went outside to have a cigarette and called him myself. I feigned a relaxed demeanor, and at first he tried to talk to me as a bro, and kept saying, "Dude, I'm gonna get someone out there, but it's gonna take a few weeks." When he couldn't sway me that way, he started yelling about his girlfriend and her knowledge of the law. Unbeknownst to him, I had read the tenant laws in my state. So, as he tried to lie, I waited until he finished and then recited the law stating that if an apartment was considered uninhabitable, the landlord needed to pay for the tenant to stay in a place until it was resolved, meaning he would have to pay for us to stay in a hotel of our choosing every night until the ceiling was fixed. He tried to say that our upstairs neighbor, Phil, was the super, but he wasn't sure if he could get him down there that night. He placed me on hold, then came back a few minutes later and said that Phil and his girlfriend were out of state. Please correct any grammar or spelling mistakes in this story below, but don't change any of the context or details, and remove special characters like emojis or brackets. I rang Phil's doorbell and asked, with Jay on speakerphone, if he was assigned as the super. He laughed and said no. Dejected, Jay said he would have people out there the next day. Previously, he said they were busy for at least 3 weeks. There's more to this incident, but it led to 2 conclusions. If you're going to lie, then there has to be consistency in your lie, and make sure that the people you lie to don't communicate with each other. This is where a feud started between Kate and me versus him and his mother. She was the original landlord and gave the house to him so he could begin to make a side profit. Fast forward to a year later. Jay stopped coming to the house and his mom began handling things. Around this time, my ex and I had been laid off, and we were working with Social Security for food, health, and housing insurance. We were approved for all 3 in April, but we wouldn't get the check until May. When our typical check wasn't in the landlord's mailbox, he immediately gave us a summons, saying that he was taking us to court for eviction. The day we went to court, he had no lawyer, and here's a non-verbatim account of how the case went. Judge, does the defense have a means to pay within 90 days of non-payment? Us. Yes, Your Honor. Hands over paperwork showing that he will be reimbursed for April and May. Judge, I see no problem. They are breaking no laws. Why are we here? J. Well, Your Honor, they have been bullying. Judge, I don't care. Unless they are breaking a law, then this case is dismissed. Suffice it to say, Jay and his mother were not happy. Around this time in my life, things were tumultuous. My mother, who had been battling lung cancer for 4.5 years, succumbed to it in June. This happened at roughly the same time his mom came knocking, looking for payment. I explained that I would leave the check in the mailbox when we got back from the funeral home and asked her to please respect my right to mourn. She took her fingers and began rubbing them together, pretending to play the world's smallest violin. I will never forget what she said next. Ooh, my mommy just died. Woe is me. She probably had it coming. I don't care if your entire family is dead. I want my money. She smiled smugly, proud of what she had just said. I saw red and my heart jumped into my throat. I went, grabbed the check, and handed it to her in absolute shock that anyone would say something so messed up. She had finally managed to push a button that very few people I've known throughout my life have gotten close to pressing. I went into rage mode, but not in the way you would expect. The revenge. We were always told that if a health inspector came by, not to open the door. I waited until August since that was the month before the lease was going to run out, and we knew they would not extend a renewal. I walked up the block to town hall to ask for a health inspection of our property. It was scheduled for several days later. Now it's important to know several things. I was friends with all of the tenants. Phil had moved out with his fiancée, but the new tenant was a really cool girl around my age named Danny. Tom and Hannah, on the other side of the downstairs floor, had moved out in July, and Jay was still looking to fill it. The only one who wanted to stay out of this was Rose in the upper right apartment. I had gotten permission and her spare key, so I could let the inspector into Danny's apartment, and I knew that I could use the back staircase on the right side to let him into Tom's now vacant apartment. I also knew that Danny was moving out in September, a month after Kate and I. The inspector came, and it was glorious. He checked the exterior of the house first, noting that wires were exposed. There was an old empty dryer, along with other odd clutter in the backyard. I brought him inside the shared entrance, and as I expected, he noticed that the last inspection dated back to 1994, 18 years ago. This meant that for each year he did not have an inspection, there would be appropriate fines. In our apartment, we had black mold growing in our bathroom, and the bulge in the ceiling had begun to regrow to problematic proportions. Upstairs, Danny's apartment was suffering from leaks in the ceiling, and it looked like her bathroom ceiling was also on the brink of collapsing. We then went to the basement. The boiler was on the verge of exploding. There were flammable items, along with gasoline and a pack of matches, sitting right beside it. Two things I did not know were: the fire door that separated the two sides did not close all the way, rendering it moot. To be honest, I had never heard of a fire door until that day. On the right, 128-portion basement side, there was a toilet that had exploded. It had coated the surrounding walls, and the leakage prevented us from going up to the floor via the right side. The entire time, the inspector was photographing and writing constantly. We stepped outside, and he said he needed to come back. When I asked why, he said he had run out of space to write down all of the infractions. He had filled the front and had written an entire page on the back. I kindly and coyly asked, "Well, how much will it cost right now?" He scratched his head and said, "Around 20-30K from what I can see, but it's probably going to be higher as this house was never licensed to be split into apartments." I thanked him, and he was going to come back with the county inspector. We were gone when that took place, though I did ask him to send me a copy with the list of violations to my new address. So we moved out at the end of August, but I got updates from Rose. Because he was the current owner, he owed all current fines, and no new tenants could move into the empty apartments until everything was up to code. With 3 out of 4 apartments vacant, he was losing $4,500 in potential rent. He handed the property back to his mother and had to file for bankruptcy. Now here's the other thing. Every time an old tenant left and a new one was coming in, an inspection was supposed to be done. Now that all of the financial burden fell on her, they looked into the records and found that she was fined for each time she had broken that rule. $750 per violation. By the end of the year, Rose had moved out, so the place was hemorrhaging money. I sat back, proud of what I had done, and left it be. No, screw that. I wasn't close to done yet. I felt like I had destroyed Jay, but my real target had always been his mom. I learned that she had 8 properties throughout 3 towns in my county. I went to each one, spoke to the tenants, and said I was a concerned tenant from another property. I asked if they had any problems with their apartments. Every person I asked described the apartment in very poor to intolerable conditions, and that the mom was effectively a slumlord. She would ignore problems unless someone threatened to summon the inspector or turn to litigation. More often than not, people would move out and she would refuse to return their deposits, sinking those into cosmetic repairs so that the apartment looked nicely furnished. People rarely fought back because she knew that the occupants were from the upper-lower class minorities. So, being the concerned person I was, I went to the inspector of the other 2 towns and asked for an inspection to be done, with at least one tenant, if not more, awaiting the inspector's visit. Turns out, she faced pretty much the same infractions in every apartment she owned. It turned out she actually had 12 apartments, but I initially only knew about the ones that fell within my county. The remaining properties in the next county over received a mysterious heads-up to perform a surprise inspection. From what I can tell, Jay's mom had been in the landlord business for about 35-40 years. That collapsed quickly. Since we moved literally 1 block down the road from our old one, 54, I got to see Jay lose his primary source of income and have to claim bankruptcy. But I also saw that his mother was desperately trying to find a buyer for all of the apartments so she could pay off the fines. I learned 2 years later, 2014, that she, too, had to file for bankruptcy. Jay and his mother camped out in front of our next apartment for 2 days in October 2013 before she filed for bankruptcy. I'm guessing to scream at me, and/or Kate. So I called the cops and said that there were strange people standing in a no parking zone and they kept looking up at the 2nd floor. A cruiser swung by and told them to leave. I know I should have used the 2 months I spent monitoring everything to find a new job, but this was the one and only time I wanted to cripple a person where it hurt the most. Their wallets. I think I got my point across. None of this would have happened if you had just ducking fixed the ceiling before it collapsed, Jay. The next one is a petty revenge story. A few months ago, I volunteered to plan my Mill's 60th birthday and my Fiel's 64th birthday, which was a weekend in wine country. I had made a reservation for a group of 10 at a new upscale restaurant months beforehand. Because it was also a winery, we arrived 2 hours early and checked in with the restaurant to see if they could seat us earlier. Despite the empty restaurant, they said they couldn't. We understood that they could be understaffed, so we went and got some wine, hung out, and listened to live music. Close to our reservation time, I received a text from that restaurant asking us to be seated. It was beginning to rain. We walked over to the hostess, who informed us that due to the rain and our table being outdoors, they would not be able to seat us tonight. As calmly as I could, I explained that I had a reservation for months, had been there for 2 hours, and was not informed that my reservation was for an outdoor table or subject to rain. There was no indoor-outdoor option. I also explained that it was for a 60th and 64th birthday party. I asked if they could split us up between tables, but they kept saying there was nothing they could do and that it wasn't their fault, because we can't control the weather. I snapped a little and sharply said, well, what you could have done was not reserve a table for a large party that you couldn't guarantee. The manager just shrugged. We left, and because it was Saturday at 6 p.m., there was no way we would get a seat at another restaurant. I had to go to the grocery store and cook a full meal for 10 people. I emailed the manager to ask if there was anything they could comp because our experience was so terrible. I received no response after a week, so I created multiple Gmail accounts and left 10 different 1-star reviews for the fairly new restaurant. In the reviews, I mentioned that you should never book this restaurant for a large party, how they did not try to find us a table at another restaurant, how they had 2 hours to fix their error, that they booked a table they couldn't guarantee, and that they didn't move a table undercover, even though there was plenty of space. They also didn't provide any comps or make any attempt to fix their error. Due to my reviews, their Google rating dropped by 2 stars. I left 1 review for each person who didn't get a seat. Several days after posting the reviews, they reached out and offered to comp a meal for my in-laws if our group took the reviews down. I refused their offer. The next one is an entitled people story. For context, I just lost my mom to lung cancer this past Sunday after getting her home for at-home care just 2 days prior. I've been taking care of everything since then, including her beloved cat, while dealing with my own grief. The funeral home let me write the obituary due to how frazzled I was when we met with them. I only named those who I felt were closest to her, even double-checked with 2 of them. Confident with it, I sent it to the funeral home, and they didn't edit it further, posting it on their site immediately. Now on to what happened. I decided to take it easy since I'd been running on fumes for the better part of the week, sort of waiting for people to get back to me on some important matters. So, while I'm just relaxing with my furry little brother, I get a phone call. Caller ID shows it's my grandmother on my mom's ex-husband's side. I answer, and she asks why I didn't name that ex-husband, aka her precious angel. I respond honestly, I couldn't figure out a good way to do so. This so-called relative of mine proceeds to get upset, saying that it'll hurt him. She pretty much demands I edit the obituary to include this man who left us when I was 3 and hardly ever paid child support. He hasn't even bothered to get my number and call me to see how I, his so-called daughter, am doing. I calmly explained to her that I couldn't edit it. It's up on their site and out of my hands. She got mouthy with me and then told me to think about it before hanging up. Thankfully, the rest of the family is on my side and will chew her ass out. Now I have a migraine and feel more exhausted. And no, this isn't the first time she's tried to speak up for her son. The last time she did it around me, I was 16, and I called her out on it. I might update if anything interesting comes from this, but don't get your hopes up. Right now, I'm going to chill. The next one is an entitled parent story. There's a 10-and-a-half-year age gap between me and my little sister. When I was a teen, I often used to take her to the local park to give my mom a break or give her time to get some housework done, etc. At the time this story happened, I was 15. It was Wimbledon season, so my mom asked me to take my sister to the park for a few hours so she could watch it in peace. She gave me some money so we could get some fish and chips in town and some ice cream at the park. There was usually an ice cream van there. So we got some fish and chips, went to the beach for a bit to buy mom extra time, and then we headed to the park. As we approached the park gate, this EM who was dragging along her child glared at me. EM, you should be ashamed. I looked around, but there was nobody else she could have been talking to. Dumbfounded, I blankly pointed to myself as if to affirm she was talking to me. EM, girls these days are such sluts, opening their legs to anyone who asks. Who got you knocked up? Or let me guess, you don't know? I stared blankly at her for a minute. Me. This is my little sister. EM rolled her eyes and leered at me. EM, yeah, we had little sisters in my day too. I just said, okay, bye, and walked away because I was uncomfortable with conflict and just wanted out of that situation. EM, don't you dare go into the park. You'll spread your filthy diseases all over the park. I don't want my son catching your diseases. I ignored her and rushed into the park. Surely she'd leave me alone when I was surrounded by other kids and parents, right? Wrong. EM followed me around the park, demanding that I leave. The more I ignored her, the madder she got, and she kept repeating over and over, get out, you're not allowed here. At this point, a few parents noticed. One mom, let's call her FM friend, Mom, who my mom and I often chatted with, immediately stood and rushed over, just as EM grabbed my arm and yanked at me. FM, why are you grabbing a child? Let her go, who are you? EM, mind your business. FM, let her go or I'm calling the police. EM let me go but turned her anger towards FM, shouting that she was just making the park safe for her child, and I shouldn't be here because I might spread some nasty disease all over the place. She never specified what disease. I'm guessing she meant an STI or something. More parents started coming over to see what was going on. Seeing she was outnumbered, EM eventually left, dragging her child behind her, screaming obscenities at us as she slinked away. FM gave us a lift home to make sure we were safe. When I told my mom what happened, she was furious. She packed us into the car and drove us around town to look for the woman, but we didn't spot her. Thankfully, I never saw the woman again. The next one is an entitled people's story. Summer had arrived once again, and with the scorching heat, I yearned for relief. This year, I decided to fulfill my long-standing desire for a swimming pool. After weeks of anticipation, my backyard oasis finally stood before me, a magnificent pool that seemed to beckon with promises of relaxation and joy. However, just as life tends to balance its highs with lows, a storm of trouble loomed on the horizon. Within our seemingly idyllic neighborhood, one neighbor stood out like a sore thumb, a relentless Karen whose antics never failed to test the patience of all those around her. Her constant need to assert herself as the community's self-appointed ruler often left us exasperated. Little did I know that my encounter with her would be far from ordinary. One sunny afternoon, I found myself tending to the front yard, meticulously mowing the grass, when Karen halted in front of my house. With an air of entitlement, she approached me, her tone dripping with arrogance. "I noticed you built a swimming pool. When can my children come for a swim?" she demanded, her condescension palpable. Taken aback by her audacity, I responded firmly, "I'm sorry, but the pool is for my family and friends only. Public pools are available nearby, and I suggest you make use of them." But Karen, never one to be deterred, launched into a tirade about the supposed obligations of living in a neighborhood, insisting that I should share my pool with her family. Ignoring her baseless claims, I resumed my task, attempting to drown out her unwelcome presence. The following day, I awoke to a rude awakening, an alarming sight that would leave me speechless. Peering out the window, I witnessed Karen and her children frolicking in my prized pool. Shock coursed through my veins, stealing my breath and igniting a fire within me. Without a moment's hesitation, I burst out of the house, my anger fueling my every step. "What the hell are you doing on my property? Get out!" I shouted, my voice thundering with righteous indignation. Nonchalantly, Karen dismissed my rage, insisting they were almost finished and would leave in 10 minutes. Her deliberate slowness in dressing her children, relishing the chaos she had wrought, sent my heart racing with fury. Seething, I warned her through gritted teeth, "If I ever catch you trespassing on my property again, you'll regret it." In response, she smirked and taunted me with claims of my alleged criminality, asserting her right to use my pool. The encounter left me seething with anger, my mind consumed by thoughts of revenge. Days passed, and I found myself away from home on a work trip, eager to escape the mounting tension. Despite my absence, my pool remained blissfully untouched by Karen's antics, granting me a brief respite from the turmoil. Anticipation grew within me as I longed to return and bask in the cool waters of my sanctuary. Finally, the day of my return arrived, and I approached my house, eager to reclaim what was rightfully mine. As I neared the property, murmurs reached my ears, a cacophony of voices. Unsure whether they originated from my home or a neighboring yard, I cautiously entered my backyard, hoping for a peaceful sight. But to my horror, there she was once again, Karen, accompanied by her offspring, defiling my pool with unabashed audacity. A surge of fury coursed through me, threatening to erupt like a dormant volcano. "Get out now!" I roared, the words laced with a newfound resolve. Unfazed by my rage, Karen brazenly claimed divine rights to my pool, invoking a twisted sense of entitlement. Each syllable she uttered served only to deepen my determination. I approached the pool, ready to physically remove them if necessary. As I advanced, Karen's anger reached its peak, her words twisted and venomous. With an air of finality, she departed, but not without leaving behind a chilling surprise, a pool tainted by bleach, its water rendered toxic and unfit for use. My heart sank as I realized the extent of her malevolence. She had also sabotaged the pool's pump, sealing its fate. In that moment, I made a resolute decision to seek justice. Contacting the authorities, I shared the evidence captured by my home's security cameras, determined to bring Karen to account for her trespass and vandalism. Though the outcome fell short of my desires, Karen was forced to pay a hefty fine, a blow to her finances. However, karma, it seemed, had plans of its own. Faced with mounting consequences, Karen chose to sell her house, severing her ties to the neighborhood. The ultimate blow came as she lost custody of her children to her ex-husband, leaving her world shattered. With the proceeds from the house sale, she settled her debt, vanishing into the shadows, her whereabouts unknown. While I harbor no desire to delve into Karen's fate, I find solace in the knowledge that justice was served. The echoes of her insidious actions have gradually faded, leaving me to enjoy the tranquility of my restored pool. And as for my neighbors, free from Karen's oppressive grip, they too can now revel in the harmony that was denied them for so long. The next one is a pro-revenge story. My wife and I decided to go to Southern California for the holidays. We found ourselves a nice resort and checked in. All was well until we noticed that the walls in our room were very thin. As we entered our room, we could hear our next-door neighbor talking and having an argument with his girlfriend. We shared one common wall with them. They were shouting pretty loud, and we could hear everything through the wall. We'll refer to this guy as Noisy Neighbor, NN. NN kept fighting with his girlfriend about something she said earlier. We didn't follow, weren't interested, and decided to go eat and explore around the town we were in. We came back around 10 at night and all was quiet. We figured that NN and his girlfriend had already gone to bed, so we went to bed as well. Turns out he was out. NN and his girlfriend came back at 12, laughing and really loud. Loud to the point that we could hear them and hear their entire conversation. Looks like they made up after the fighting that morning. We hear the girlfriend say that she is hungry, and NN calls for pizza delivery. It was there that we heard NN's name, phone number, and credit card info. Not that we would do anything with it. They kept chatting and laughing, and we could hear every bit of their conversation through the thin walls. My wife and I tried earplugs, the radio, and everything we could think of to drown out the noise. We were hoping that they would eventually turn in for the night, and there would be some peace and quiet. Yet NN was full of energy and boyish laughter. Finally, at around 2 a.m., we decided to call the concierge and let the resort security deal with it. The resort we stayed at was meant for mindfulness and meditation, so it did enforce some quiet hours. Security called them up and told them that they were too loud and to keep their voices down. This did the trick for some time and we fell asleep, only to be woken up again at around 5 a.m. to some really loud sex, like moaning and screaming from the girlfriend. After they were done with their business, they washed up and just kept talking. Laying there in bed, I heard all about NN's job, where he was from, where he grew up, his political views, and so on. Finally, at 6 or so, we called up the front desk again. This time, security actually came and knocked on their door to tell them to keep their voices down as it was still officially quiet hours. NN and his girlfriend were furious that they could be disturbed when they were just having fun and having a good time. They claimed that they weren't loud at all, and why can't they just have some fun? They threatened to leave poor reviews for the resort and made sure that all of their friends would hear about this. Security took all that in, gave them their warning, and left. After security left, NN and his GF started talking crap about my wife and me through the wall, knowing that we could hear it. Stuff like, "Our neighbors are such a holes," probably racial slur, yo. "What's wrong with having sex with my GF, huh? Too loud for you pussies?" And just deliberately talked to his GF in a really loud voice, talking about how great the sex was and how she was going to scream and moan louder next time. I was frustrated at this time, with very little sleep. I took out my cell phone and recorded everything that we were hearing, hoping to show the front desk just how little soundproof the room was, and hopefully ask for a room change. But then something happened. At 7 or so, we heard NN's phone ring, and suddenly NN and GF were really silent. Then I heard NN say, "Hi, NN's wife, how are you, sweetie? I just woke up here at the conference, long day ahead, I miss you so much." It turns out NN was cheating on his wife with his mistress over Christmas. At this point, my wife and I hatched a plan. With all the information that we had on NN, his wife's name, and where they lived, we started combing Facebook and yellowpages.com for more information. Lo and behold, we found what NN looked like, an old man in his 50s, and his wife. All the information matched up with what he had been talking about all night, plus his zip code when he ordered pizza. A bit more digging, and we found where NN's wife worked and her email address. A simple Outlook.com email address later, I compressed the recording I had and sent it to NN's wife. The best part is that the recording contained NN's wife's phone call to NN, so she had no doubt it was definitely NN. Exhausted with little sleep, my wife and I decided to just get up and go get some breakfast around town. Racial. We came back a few hours later and stopped by the concierge's desk. We wanted to thank them and their security for trying to help us get some sleep and to ask for another room. Turns out we didn't need a room switch. "They checked out this morning a few days earlier than scheduled," the concierge told us. She mentioned something about an urgent family concern that NN had to attend to. Looks like our plan had worked much better than we had hoped for. The rest of our stay at the resort was quiet and uneventful. No one else checked into that room. I did show the front desk parts of my recording just so they know that they need to work on soundproofing their rooms in the future. The next one is a petty revenge story. This happened way back. My daughter is 30 now. When I was 18 and in my first year of college, I got pregnant. The father joined the Navy to escape responsibility. My parents, who are strict conservatives except when it's inconvenient, abandoned me and cut me off financially. They wanted me to have an abortion to prevent the loss of my scholarship. That's how I found myself at 18 suddenly and totally responsible for myself and my living situation, with no financial or emotional support from anyone. I lived at a private dorm and was befriended by the property manager, Donna. When I told her my situation, she swooped in like a hero and helped me get a place to stay at one of the other properties she managed. I was getting evicted from the dorm. She then helped me get a job at a gift shop at one of those properties. I thought she was the most wonderful person for all of this, until her true motives became clear. She wanted to adopt my baby, even though I had expressed no interest in giving my baby up for adoption. After a few weeks of work, she launched a campaign to convince me I was unfit to be a mother and that my baby would be so much better off if I let Donna have it. At first, it was subtle, passive-aggressive remarks about how much money she and her husband had, how she couldn't have children herself, how she hoped she was able to adopt one day, and what a wonderful life they would give their baby. But as time passed, her approach became more aggressive and direct. She was always around the shop and would even come to my apartment, ready to point out things I did or didn't do that proved what a terrible mother I would be. She went into long rants about how awful I was for having a baby without a father, how we'd be welfare trash forever, how God brought her into my life because she was meant to have my baby. It was endless and constant for months. Sometimes I let her comments upset me and make me wonder if she was right, but in my heart, I knew that I'd be a good mother. For a while, feeling intimidated, I let myself be bullied into including her in baby-related events. I even let her go with me to the sonogram where I found out my baby was a girl. She was so excited for me. As I got closer to delivering, I got stronger in making it clear to Donna that I was not giving up my baby. I tried to avoid Donna as much as I could, but was regularly reminded of how much power she had over my living situation. I soon had coworkers telling me she was claiming that my baby's adoption was a done deal. She even told people she was decorating a nursery and buying baby girl clothes. When it became clear that she was not going to change my mind, she started threatening me with eviction from my apartment and firing me from my job. That way I'd realize how unstable my situation was and recognize I had no business having a baby. And sure enough, I lost my job. She fired me for not wearing my shoes behind the cashier's counter at the gift shop. When I was on my feet all day, my feet would swell right out of my shoes. I'd stay behind the counter and slip off my shoes for a bit, but never in view of the customers. Still, that was reason enough in Donna's mind to teach me a lesson. It didn't take long after losing my job to also lose my apartment. I ended up couch surfing and even spent some time homeless until I got some housing assistance. In the meantime, I had gone to the EEOC and complained, and they helped me mediate with the owners of the gift shop property. As a result, Donna got fired from managing that property, and I got months of back pay and some extra money for my trouble, in exchange for not full-out suing them. This small cash windfall turned out to be a huge blessing that actually enabled me to survive financially until I had my baby and could get back to school. Donna firing me was the best thing that could have ever happened. I saw her years later and she was still childless. Best revenge, my daughter is now getting ready to graduate, full scholarship and magna cum laude, from a top law school. Turns out being raised by a single mom is not as awful as Donna thought. The next one is an entitled people story. So, I work the graveyard shift as a security guard for a small private company, and one of the places I have worked security for was at 2 hotels. One thing I try to do while I am at work is to be respectful and give someone the benefit of the doubt, especially when there is supposedly only one witness to something going on. I also try to be as respectful as I can be, even when the person or people I am dealing with are being uncooperative and belligerent. One of the things I do when I first get on shift is to talk to the front desk of the first hotel I would guard and see if they need anything before I begin my patrols for the night. And I always check in with the front desk as often as I can so they know I'm there to help if needed. I then walk over to the second hotel and do the same thing. Most of the time they ask me to go to a room and knock to let the guests know they are being a little too loud and that there is a noise complaint, and the guest usually apologizes, and then quiets down for the night. This night in question, I had to deal with 3 entitled parents. One thing about the hotel is that the lobby closes to the public at 9 p.m., so any large gatherings are prohibited from continuing at that time, and that is when I start work. I grab a radio so the hotels can contact me at any moment they need security. I walk from the first hotel after letting them know that I am on duty, and make my way over to the second hotel and do the same thing. When I check in with the front desk of the second hotel, the clerk behind the desk asks if I could talk to a group of adults who have been drinking and are getting very loud. I calmly and respectfully tell them that they can continue their party in their rooms, but they have to vacate the lobby as it is officially closed for the night. The clerk at the front desk tells me that she has tried to get them to quiet down and leave the lobby for the past 10 minutes. Yet they complain that as guests, they are entitled to stay in the lobby. They complain that the hotel has gotten security involved and complain on their way back to the rooms but leave the lobby. I begin my patrols when I get a call less than 30 minutes later at the same hotel because someone has complained that children are running in the halls. The hotel is currently hosting a sports event and many kids from the sports teams are there. The clerk behind the front desk has me meet her in the lobby and we go to the room we believe the children are in. When I see the kids, they say that they have all been outside until a moment ago when they came back to the room, which I can verify is true. The kids then say that they have seen 2 kids that appear to be twins running through the hallways. The clerk leans back and gives an exhausted sigh and tells me that she has heard all day about those 2 kids, and she believes that the parents are in the group that has been kicked out of the lobby earlier. I walk around the hotel to see if I can find the room the kids are in and am stopped by hotel maintenance and told that they have seen those kids running away from the floor I am on and that the fire retardant cases are all open and one appears to have been kicked in and is badly dented. I spot the 2 kids in question and they immediately go back to their room at a running pace when they spot me. I find out what room they are in and report everything to the clerk before going to the first and second floor to find out if any more damage has happened. A guest tells me that they saw 2 twins running around the second floor, and I find all of the cases open except one that has been broken. It is missing the handle and the glass is cracked. I go to the lobby and show the pictures of all the damage done, and the clerk calls her manager directly at 10 p.m. on a Saturday night. For those who don't know, most hotel management is never in on the weekends. The manager says that these kids and their parents need to leave immediately and charges the room for all damages done to the hotel. I wait until 10:30 p.m. to go to the room, hoping that the parents will be back in the room. I go up to the room and knock on the door, and one of the kids responds. The encounter goes as follows. OP, hello, I am security for the hotel. Are your parents in the room? Entitled kid. No. OP, can you tell me where your parents are? Entitled kid, in another room. OP, can you tell me what room they are in? The entitled kid tells me what room the parents are in, and I immediately tell the children to contact their parents and have them meet me at the room. As soon as the door closes, I step away from the door but keep it in immediate view and contact the front desk and ask the clerk to wait with me, since we are dealing with minors and for safety reasons for all parties involved, and don't want to deal with the "he was harassing us for no reason and stalking us all night" crap. The parents take 15 minutes to come to the room as they expect me to leave the floor the children are on, and I am afraid they will run to another room and break more stuff on the way. The first thing that happens is the entitled father starts yelling at me. Entitled father, what are you doing creeping outside of our children's room? OP, hello, I am a security officer with the hotel. I was asked to speak with you as your children have been accused of breaking hotel property. Friend of entitled parents. So you thought you would harass young boys? Do you get off on doing that or something? OP, sir, your children have been accused of breaking hotel property, and because of the risk of them supposedly doing this again, my job here is to protect this hotel from such things. Your children are considered a threat to the safety of the hotel. Entitled. Father, you have no right to be outside of their room? You should have come to speak to us at our room, not be a creep and stand outside their room like a pervert. OP, sir, they are classified as a threat with the accusations of the destruction of private property. As it stands, the hotel managers have made it clear that you are no longer guests here and you must leave the property immediately. Entitled mother, You have no proof that our children are behind this. They have behaved perfectly and they have been in their rooms all night. Unfortunately, as they keep trying to yell and talk over me, I am beginning to get irritated and am losing my polite attitude and starting to become that extreme a-hole security guard with the cop attitude that no one wants to deal with. OP, that's bullcrap. I have hotel staff that has seen them outside of their room. I have guests in the hotel that have seen them outside of their room, and I have personally seen that they have been outside of their room. Entitled Mother. Everyone else is lying and personally targeting our children, including you. There are many children here that could be the culprits behind these accusations, but you are just choosing to blame everything on our children. OP, I don't care if you believe me or not. You need to leave the property immediately. At this moment, the entitled father gets directly in my face and says, I don't have to do anything you say, and we are not leaving. I work for the FBI. I look at him and demand he shows me his federal credentials proving that he is part of the FBI. The state that I live and work in states that if you identify as a member of local or federal law enforcement or as a federal employee, you have to show your credentials, even if you live in another state. The entitled father says he doesn't have to until I tell him about this exact same law. He then tells me that he left them in the room and needs to get them. When I am able to confirm that they don't want to leave, I calmly walk back to the hotel lobby, but not before the entitled friend says, Go ahead and leave, you pervert. You know you are wrong and that you have nothing to prove. As soon as I am in the elevator, I get on the radio with another clerk at the front desk and tell them to call the local sheriff's department and tell her the entire encounter and explain that they are now trespassing on hotel property. While the clerk is on the phone, the night auditor comes in and I brief him on what is going on. The entitled father comes down and begins demanding the hotel give the family a full refund or they are not leaving and that they can't do anything as he is FBI. He unfortunately severely scares the two clerks that are still on shift and makes the night auditor nervous with this, and I tell them to let law enforcement know that the man is claiming this, and that I now fear he has a weapon on the property. Thankfully, they go back to their rooms after realizing that the hotel will not budge, and they stay in their rooms for the rest of the night. I check all the hallways just in case, but thankfully they remain clear for the rest of my shift. Law enforcement shows up around 3 in the morning, and when I explain everything to them, they become guarded, especially now that I said I fear the man is FBI and may have a weapon on the property that is not registered in the hotel database. Law enforcement says that they can take the family away as they are trespassing, but there is little that can be done. The parents tell the officers that I have not talked to the parents, nor has the hotel spoken to them about anything. The entitled father and his friend start demanding information from the hotel about the clerks involved and all of my work information. I tell them I am not allowed to legally give out any of my work information outside of the name of my work. It isn't true, but the guy believes it and says he will contact my work and make sure my superiors hear about me and how I am a creep. The rest of the night is uneventful, and the entitled family stays in their rooms, but that's because they don't want to leave. And the night auditor is a nice guy and doesn't want to kick the children out at 4 in the morning with nowhere else to go. Since the kids of these entitled parents are connected to a sports group and there are about 10 to 15 rooms all connected under the group, the hotel decides to charge each room with the destruction of property and attaches a report from both hotel staff that has been written and myself to make sure it is known why each room is charged over $500 in damages. One of the fun things about that night is that one of the sheriffs that shows up is a friend from high school that I haven't seen in over 10 years. It is nice to catch up with him and see that he is doing well. Thank you for watching. I would really appreciate it if you could like the video and subscribe to our channel if you haven't already. We'll see you again tomorrow.